Good morning, everybody. Shalom, shalom. Good morning, everybody. Shalom, Boker Tov. Hi, Chana. Hi, Andy, Phyllis, Graciela, and Helen. Nice to see you. Shalom. Also to our friends on YouTube, as we wait for everybody to join us, I'm going to start off with today's Hayom Yom. Today's date is the 20th day of Sivan. 20th day of Sivan, which historically was one of the saddest days in Jewish history. It is a day in which a large amount of Jewish people were killed during the Cossack uprisings of 1648 and 1649. So it is their memories that their precious souls and innocent souls that we remember today as we study Torah in the memory of our ancestors from the Cossack uprisings who died today. Okay, so today's Yom Yom goes as follows: 20th day of Sivan. Amongst my grandfather's aphorisms, this would be the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Reb Shmuel. The intellectual and emotional structure of the Chassid is consonant with his first Yechidus with his Rebbe. You know, our soul is made up of 3 intellectual and 7 emotional attributes. They define us. It's your character, it's your personality, it's your identity. Your intellectual and emotional structure is consistent with your experience in your first private audience with the Rebbe. The first Yechidus is commensurate with the essence character of the Chassid. The Rebbe, who is the mothership, the mother soul of the generation, senses who you are and nurtures and addresses you in accordance with your soul makeup and your identity. Every generation has a Moses, has a mothership, a soul which nurtures all the souls of that generation. That is what the Rebbe is, the Rebbe of each generation. Your experience with the Rebbe in your first audience, your first private audience with the Rebbe is like brain surgery. It's very, very sensitive. And that's the value, the importance of visiting a Rebbe, like going to the Ohel, for example, the Rebbe's gravesite in Queens, in New York, versus just visiting another rabbi. It's nice to visit a rabbi, but when you go to the Rebbe, this is the mothership, the mother soul of the generation. The Rebbe prescribes an order of divine service appropriate to the nature of the Chassid's essence character. So when the Rebbe tells you to do something, it's not just random pieces of information. It's not just good advice. It is soul essence advice. It is who you are. It is custom soul guidance for what your soul needs to know. Robin, I see you're in Scarsdale. I didn't realize that you went up north. I thought you guys are still with us, but hey, during this quarantine, who would know where anybody is? But it's nice to see that you're okay. You're up in Scarsdale. Hope all's well. And with that, I'm going to continue now into what we're studying today. Hi, Keith and Ed. I'm going to continue with our study today, which is the study of the Shema Yisrael. Let's get into the study of Shema Yisrael, as we've been studying in the past few Fridays, getting comfortable with what we're doing in prayer. If you have a prayer book, we're on page 42 of the Hebrew of the Chabad Siddur. It's the Shema Yisrael. And if you don't have a prayer book, you can find it online at HebrewBooks.org/16091. That's HebrewBooks.org/16091. 991 to see your online version of the prayer book. So we spoke a lot about the meditation of the Shema Yisrael. We spoke about the covering of the eyes, why you're saying the Shema covering your eyes, why you're saying the Shema sitting down, why the two letters are large in the Torah, the two letters, the Ayin and the Dalet, in the sentence of Shema Yisrael. We learned a lot about that, but today we're going to go a little further inside the Shema. The mitzvahs which we mention inside of the Shema are three mitzvahs. Educating the young, the mitzvah of education, chinuch it's called, tefillin, and mezuzah. Now, since in this series we've been working on, it's called Judaism at Home, we've been speaking about the context of this class as being introducing Judaism into our homes. I think it'd be appropriate to pause for a moment and talk about the importance of the mezuzah and the need for a mezuzah on each door. Because that is the content of the Shema Yisrael on page 42. Each room in our home serves a different purpose and responds to a particular need in our life. The Shema, the prayer inscribed upon the parchment of the Mezuzah that we see every time we cross the threshold from one room to the next, reminds us that there is a powerful unifying force and a purpose that ties together all the seemingly disconnected parts of our lives. That unifier is God's oneness, and our mission is to reveal God's oneness by directing the various circumstances of our lives towards holiness. So let's get down to the basics. What is a mezuzah? A mezuzah is a scroll. It's a parchment. It's just like a Torah scroll. It's a miniature Torah scroll. A Torah is the 5 books of Moses given to Moses on Mount Sinai, dictated by God to Moses. It's ink, special ink written with a quill and parchment. What the mezuzah is one section of the Torah scroll, the section of the Shema. It's Shema Yisrael and Ve'ahavta, the first paragraph of the Shema. That's it. That's the entire mezuzah. Just like a Torah scroll has to be written with precision, without any mistakes. You can't have any spelling mistakes in a Torah scroll, otherwise it would be unkosher. Same thing with the mezuzah. You see, the scroll, the Torah scroll, and the mezuzah is like a brain. It's like brain surgery. See, you're not so concerned about. Maybe you won't be so concerned about a plastic surgeon or a dermatologist as you would be about a brain surgeon. Obviously, you're very concerned about any doctor that you go to, but a dermatologist is no. If he slips a little bit, is it so terrible? Of course, it's terrible, but it's not as terrible as if a brain surgeon slips a little bit. I mean, that could be paralysis. That could be the end of life. They're in far more sensitive part of your body, in the brain, than they are when they're doing something to your knee, to the skin of your knee. So the mezuzah and the Torah is like brain surgery, because the codes, the sequence of the words upon the mezuzah and upon the Torah is the channel of blessing for our lives. Like a DNA code or like an HTML code for a computer screen. It's the recipe. If the recipe is intact, then the food will come out proper. Then the child will come out healthy. But if the source code is imperfect, if there's a mistake in the source code, then the image doesn't load, the baby's not healthy, God forbid, and the food comes out a disaster. So that's why it's really important to have a kosher mezuzah. You don't buy mezuzahs on Amazon, you don't buy them at eBay, and you certainly don't buy them at a flea market. A mezuzah is not the kind of thing that you want to buy the cheapest item for. I've seen so many mezuzahs in people's homes that are like a joke. They're written on paper. They'll actually write, some guy will actually write in Hebrew, this mezuzah is not kosher, maybe to clear their own conscience for having willingly sold an unsuspecting American tourist what they thought was a kosher mezuzah just because it had Hebrew words on it. So you want to buy your mezuzah from a reputable source. And I want to tell you that if you need a mezuzah, you can buy it here from the Chabad. We work with one scribe. We know exactly who they are, and we know that those mezuzahs are 100% kosher. You can actually order your mezuzahs online at jewishgardens.com/security, where you can see all the various options of what kind of mezuzah, what size of mezuzah. Everything is over there. jewishgardens.com/security to buy kosher mezuzahs. But I want to tell you that the number one misconception of the mezuzah, in my experience, above all, the number one mezuzah misconception is that people think that once the mezuzah, well, first of all, they think that the mezuzah is the case. That's the number one misconception. I think it's the case. And they're not so worried about the scroll on the inside. The case can be made out of whatever you want. You don't even need a case. What you need is a scroll. The scroll is the mezuzah. Everything else is merely packaging. Right? So you can't have a case which is empty of a scroll. That's not a mezuzah. That's just a case. It's not a mezuzah. You have to have a kosher scroll on every single door except for a bathroom in order to have a mezuzah on your door. Just because you have a decorative case that your grandmother gave you, it doesn't mean you have a mezuzah. It means you have a case. But the second most common misconception about mezuzahs is that people think that once it's up, it's there forever. In fact, they get superstitious about it, and they say that when they sell their home and they move, they shouldn't even take it down. There's some truth to that if there's a Jew moving in. But the key here is that you have to check the mezuzah every 3 years to make sure that it's still kosher. You see the weather, especially the weather in Florida, humidity, salt water in the air, hurricanes, rain, can easily disqualify mezuzah. If one droplet of water gets in there into the scroll, it's most probably not going to be kosher. It's going to smudge, the letters are going to touch, the letters are going to melt, they're going to crack. If there's a single crack in a letter, it's not kosher. To make sure your mezuzah is kosher, you have to get it checked every 3 years at the bare bones. Some people check their mezuzahs once a year. And the same thing, by the way, goes for tefillin. All the above I've said about mezuzah, same applies to tefillin as well. And you can check your mezuzahs right now. Just go to the website, go to jewishgardens.com/security, fill out the form, and you'll be able to check your mezuzah. You'll have it done. That's jewishgardens.com/security, and we will be able to check your mezuzahs. We'll send them to the scribe, get them back to you in a couple weeks' time, and you'll know that you're certified, recertified, and safe, because the mezuzah brings safety and security to you. Brings God's blessing to you. It's like a Wi-Fi signal. When you put the mezuzah up, that home, that business, that office, that room is inside the network. It's got God's providence. You've invited God to literally stand at your door as your protector. You wouldn't think of not paying your cell phone bill just because you have a phone. Obviously, you have to pay it every month. You wouldn't think of not paying your alarm, your ADT alarm bill, just because you have the box, right? If you're not connected to the system, it's not good. Same thing with the mezuzah. You have the mezuzah, you got the hardware, but if you don't have the software, if you're not connected to the network, then what's the point? What did you do? You've wasted your time. You've wasted your money. You have a mezuzah on the door, but you have the hardware, but if it's not kosher, then you're off the grid. You're not in the network. And that's what we say in the Shema, Uchatavtam al mezuzot beitecha, and you shall write them upon the doorposts of your homes and upon your gates. We have to put a mezuzah on every single doorway of our homes except for the bathroom doors. Now, the second paragraph of the Shema, the first paragraph starts Ve'ahavta, but the second paragraph of the Shema is from the book of Devarim, also in the Torah, chapter 11. It highlights the importance of observing all of God's commandments. It describes the rewards we earn by observing the divine commandments and the consequences that result from disobeying them. It repeats a number of the themes mentioned in the first paragraph of the Shema. There's a difference though, because the first paragraph of the Shema, it's in the singular tense, and the second paragraph of the Shema, it's in the plural tense, which gives us a very powerful lesson. I've mentioned this briefly. Sorry, I mentioned this recently, so I'll say it briefly. That the reason why the Shema, the second paragraph, repeats what's said in the first paragraph just in the plural tense is to remind us of the importance of the individual as well as the importance of the community. You can't say I'm a Jew on my own, therefore I don't need to be part of a community. And you can't say that I'm part of a community, therefore I don't need to worry about my own personal spiritual growth. Both are important, both lanes are parallel, and that's why you have the first paragraph of the Shema talking to the individual parallel to the second paragraph of the Shema talking to the community. But in the second paragraph of the Shema, it also mentions the unique bond that the people of Israel have with the land of Israel. It's an unbreakable bond. We have never, ever broken our connection with the land of Israel, despite how much our persecutors and oppressors and conquerors tried to separate us from our land and try to change the name of the land and to literally rewrite history. You know why it's called Palestine? Because the Romans, 2,000 years ago, when they conquered Judea, when they conquered the land of Israel, they tried to add insult to injury. They tried to rub salt into the wound. And not only did they send the Jews to Rome in chains to fight in the Colosseum, but the Romans actually tried to rewrite history by renaming the land of Israel from Judea to Palestina, which is an ancient nation that was wiped out by the Jews, the Philistines. As if to say that this is not the land of the Jews, it's the land of the Philistines, which is a problem that we struggle with to this very day, where this phantom nomadic people somehow claim, this people without a history, they somehow claim that they are the ancient Philistines. There is no Palestinian language. There is not a single Palestinian statesman or writer or thinker or any famous Palestinian person before 1967, when this nation was literally strategized into existence. When the Arabs realized that they couldn't conquer Israel militarily after their crushing defeat in the Six-Day War, they figured they would try to beat us diplomatically through statesmanship. So they literally invented a nation called the Palestinians, a nation without a history book, a nation without anything. There's nothing about the Palestinians. Nobody ever heard of these people before 1967. And they just somehow tacked themselves on what the Romans did 2,000 years ago to name the land Palestina only in order to hurt the Jews. They also at the same time changed the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, which means city of capital. But that didn't stick. Our connection to the land of Israel was never broken. We can name you thousands and thousands and thousands, countless individuals who were Jewish people in the land of Israel, rulers of the land of Israel, sons and daughters of the land of Israel. We can tell you about a language, Hebrew, of the land of Israel. The land of Judea is the people of Judea. The language of Hebrew is the language of the Hebrews. We observe the laws of the land. We speak the language of the land. It's just our connection to Israel is unbreakable, and that's part of what we do in the Shema. And to think that the world still will refuse to give us to endorse and ratify the Jewish people's connection to the land of Israel is just defies rhyme and reason. Okay. Hi, Bernie and Whitney and Lucy and Yosef. Nice to see you all. Okay. We then move on to the third paragraph of the Shema. The third paragraph of the Shema is meant to help us perform another mitzvah, which is to remember our exodus from Egypt. Another biblical commandment to remember every single day the exodus from Egypt. The verses here, the third paragraph of Shema comes from Bamidbar, the fourth book of Torah, chapter 15. This passage is considered to be a part of the mitzvah of the Shema. What's the connection? Why do we include the exodus from Egypt as part of the Shema Yisrael, as part of our pledge of allegiance, our daily pledge of allegiance to God, to monotheism? Why is Exodus a part of this? Like, why do we have to now throw in some random piece of history inside of our most important declaration? It's almost like, imagine in the Declaration of Independence, we'd throw in there like a little bit of ancient history about, I don't know, like something about Napoleon or something. Like, who cares? What's the difference? Well, not even Napoleon. He was around that time, right? He was late. He was actually later. I'm sorry, forgive me. I don't know, something about the Middle Ages, something about Galileo or something. Like, why would we need a piece of history as part of our Declaration of Independence, our Pledge of Allegiance? Why is the third paragraph of the Shema included, which talks about the Exodus from Egypt? The reason is beautiful, because the Exodus from Egypt is not merely an historical account, which is part of the fabric of our nation. It is not just an ancient story, it's a story of our present tense. You see, the word Egypt isn't just a country, it's a mindset. In Hebrew, Egypt means shackles or limitations or confines. Egypt isn't only a country in the Middle East, it is also a state of mind of confinement. The largest Egypt, the largest Mitzrayim of all, is the finite world in which we live, which makes us feel distant from God. We live in this finite world, a world where God is hidden, where we can't encounter God like Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. The meditation of the Shema helps us break free from this Mitzrayim, from our limitations. It literally helps us break out of our glass ceiling. The Shema enables us to see past the veil, through the cracks in the glass ceiling, through the veil of the world's materialism and limitations, and to recognize God. It helps set us free. It helps us break free from the reality that seems to define us, a world in which God is completely hidden. By reading the Shema and pledging and declaring that God is one, and we do that with our eyes covered, as we spoke about last week, with the appropriate meditation and thought processes, we then are able to liberate our minds and to rise a little higher, to be more transcendent. As we rise above what meets the eye, that's why we cover the eyes, remember, because we're engaging something which is beyond what meets the eye. And we're connecting with something higher. We're breaking free from the way we normally live our lives to be able to connect with God on a far deeper and more meaningful level. And that's what it means to break free. The Shema is our exodus, our modern day exodus. We experience it every single morning and every single night. By reading the Shema, we are literally reinventing ourselves. We're experiencing that metamorphosis where the worm becomes the butterfly, where the mortal forges a relationship with the immortal, where the creation stands face to face with his creator. And that is an awesome experience, where the human, the Jew, becomes godly through this powerful meditation. Now, the third paragraph of the Shema also incorporates another mitzvah, which is the biblical commandment of the tzitzis. All right, that's the four-cornered garment, the biblical commandment, that when you wear a four-cornered garment applicable to males, because it's a mitzvah related to time, you put the tassels on the tzitz, on the corners of the four corners of your garment. We actually, it's customary for men to transfer the four corners of the tzitzis that we're holding into their left hand. That they're holding in their left hand to the right hand. When you start the Shema, you're holding the four tzitzis in your left hand so that you can cover your eyes. But when you reach this part of the Shema, the third paragraph of the Shema, you move the tzitzis from your left hand into your right hand. And if you're left-handed, you do it the other way around. You go from your right hand to your left hand. The string of the tzitzis are then kissed each time we say the word tzitzis to express endearment of the mitzvah. And once more, when we read the word emes, the final word that is appended at the conclusion of the Shema. So it's a form of endearment. We literally kiss the tzitzis as we read about the mitzvah of tzitzis. By the way, we do the same thing with the tefillin. In the first and second paragraph of the Shema, we say, and you shall bind them upon your arm and between your eyes, a sign. You literally touch, you go, and you shall bind them as upon your arm, kiss. And there shall be a sign between your eyes, touch and kiss. We do that twice. So we literally kiss our tefillin during the time that we acknowledge them, which is interesting at a time when you're wearing a mask. When you're davening with a mask, the one thing that you can't really do is kiss. So I realized that when I say the Shema these days, with a mask on, instead of kissing the tzitzis, I just squeeze them. And I touch the tefillin. Obviously, I don't kiss it. I just touch it. Now, when we recite the words, remember all the commandments of the Lord, which is part of that third paragraph of the Shema, the tzitzis reminds us of all the commandments of the Lord. Why? Because we've spoken about this before. The tzitzis, the word tzitzis has a numerical value of 600, plus 8 strings on each corner, and 5 knots on each corner is 600, plus 8 plus 5 is 613. 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. So the tzitzis reminds us of all the commandments of the Lord. When we say these words, we should think about Shabbos, about which our sages said that the Shabbos is equivalent to all the mitzvahs of the Torah. And by doing so, we've now satisfied the sixth and final of the 6 remembrances mentioned in the Torah. We've just gone through them through the past few weeks. We've mentioned all of the 6 remembrances. You'll notice that at the end of the morning service, there's a list of the 6 remembrances you're supposed to recite every single day. And we've remembered all 6 of them through the service, the morning service, culminating at the Shema, where we remember all the 6 things, that the 6 mitzvahs that God commands us in the Torah to remember. It's actually slightly different to the 6 remembrances at the end of the Shema. In the biblical sense, there are 6 things we also remember, and those 6 things are all listed in the leading up to the Shema, the blessing leading up to the Shema, and during the Shema. So what we realize is that what we realize right now is the Judaism that you're able to do at home. That, even if you're in quarantine, even if you're not coming to shul yet, you're still able to observe Judaism. Judaism in the shul is communal Judaism. But if you're not coming to shul for whatever reason, you're still able to bring holiness to your own home. Through davening at home, we've spoken about many other mitzvahs through this series. But the one we're learning right now is prayer at home. There's so many mitzvahs that you can do at home. Just what we covered today was the mitzvah of Mezuzah, which applies to the home, the mitzvah of tefillin, which you can do at home, the mitzvah of tzitzis, which you wear in your body the whole time, the mitzvah of Shabbos we mentioned, the 6 remembrances, prayer. There's so many monotheism, that, pledging oneness with God, connecting with God, reinventing yourself with God. That all these things you're able to do at home. You don't have to be in a synagogue in order to have a relationship with God. This is very meaningful and beautiful stuff that you're able to experience from the comforts of your own home. Judaism, God is not relegated merely to the houses of worship. Now, at the very, very end of the Shema, there's one final piece I want to share with you, which is 3 words that you're supposed to add. We mentioned last week that there's 245 words in the Shema. But when you add the 3 extra words at the end, it becomes 248. The 248 words correspond to the 248 limbs of our body. Each word is a limb. Just like every limb in your body is important and you can't mess around with it. You couldn't afford a problem in the pancreas or a problem in the wherever. So too, every word should be clearly enunciated. Every word should be pronounced. You shouldn't swallow your words. You should read Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha bechol levavcha. You shouldn't even swallow. You see, when a word ends with an L, with a lamed, and starts with a lamed, you can easily swallow, like bechol levavcha. You should say rather bechol, stop, levavcha. Right? Bechol, stop, levavcha. That way you finish the previous word. You start the next word clearly. Each word is carefully formed, carefully pronounced, just like the limbs of your body that you wouldn't want them just connected and feeding off each other. You want each one healthy, each one taken care of, right? So how do you make sure that you have 248 words in your Shema when praying in private, before adding the word emet, which is the first word of the next paragraph, which we do immediately after the completing of the Shema? The last 3 words of the Shema are repeated. These are the words, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God, your God. Those 3 words you repeat at the end of the Shema when you're praying alone. That way you're bringing up the total of the words of the Shema from 245 to 248, corresponding to the limbs of the body. Now, it's interesting to note that this is the Chabad custom. But in the Ashkenazi custom, they don't add the 3 words at the end of the Shema. They actually add 3 words at the beginning of the Shema. Not these 3 words, but 3 alternate words. I wonder if any of our listeners are familiar with that custom, with the Ashkenazi custom of adding 3 words at the beginning of the Shema. I remember what they are. I remember seeing them, but I don't remember what they are because I don't say them. There's 3 words that they add at the beginning of the Shema, and this is the reason, because it's 248. Same goal, just a different way of getting there. Now, when praying with a congregation, it is not necessary to add these 3 words because the leader of the congregation repeats these 3 words on behalf of the entire congregation. Okay? Now, after the Shema, we go into the blessings following the Shema. So we spoke last week about the blessings leading up to the Shema. Now we're talking about the blessings after the Shema. On page 44 in the prayer book, the Shema is followed by a blessing that opens with a string of expressions that endorse all that was read in the Shema. It's like validating, it's endorsements. This is, I am candidate so-and-so, and I endorse this message. That's really what we're doing after the Shema. We're validating, stamping approval on what we just said. In fact, 15 expressions of endorsement are cited. True, certain, established, enduring. We actually employ a lot of alliteration, 15 words, all starting with the letter Vav. The letter Vav, which we've spoken in the meditation and prayer course, the letter Vav at the beginning of a Hebrew word means and. Vav at the beginning of a word means and. So it's a nice alliteration, 15 words that are endorsing. The need for this has been explained. Now, where does this blessing come from? Fascinating. Who wrote this? It's not a blessing, it's like an endorsement. Who wrote this prayer? It's interesting that it comes from the Spanish Jews, who, by the way, they were the ones that wrote the Kol Nidre prayer as well during the time of the Spanish Inquisition. But this prayer is much, much older than Kol Nidre. It comes from the days of the Second Commonwealth of the Jewish people. You'll remember, we came out of Egypt. We wandered in the desert for 40 years. Eventually, we made it into the Promised Land. And we lived in the Promised Land for about 800 years until King Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, who exiled us to Babylon and later became Persia, Iran. In Iran is where we experienced the Purim story. And it was the benevolent King Cyrus, also known as King Darius II, son of Esther and Achashverosh, who sent the Jews back to Israel, who sponsored the rebuilding of the Second Temple under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah. So when King Darius or King Cyrus sent the Jews back to Israel to build the Second Temple, it's interesting, by the way, in today's terms, without getting political, I have no intention of getting political, just to draw a connection. I think it was Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, who tried to compare President Trump to Cyrus in some sort of a biblical connection. What was he talking about? He was talking about this. When President Trump did something with Jerusalem, he basically he did. I'm trying to remember what he did. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That's what he did. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. When he did that, Pompeo compared him to Cyrus by saying that he compared him to Cyrus by saying that just like Cyrus was a non-Jew who recognized the right of the Jewish people over the land of Israel or helped them rebuild Jerusalem, that's what President Trump was doing. So that's just a historical connection. That's a historical connection to this era of Jewish history, which is quite a fascinating era of Jewish history. Please, friends, I know we're months before a national election. That was not a political statement. It was just a reference to something that was recently in the news. It's a story of Jewish history that not many people are aware of. So please, that was not an endorsement or a criticism of our president. It was merely a reference to a connection of ancient history in modern day terms, a reference to a biblical episode, which is in modern day terms. So please do not take that or anything that I say. I never speak politics. Please don't take that as an endorsement or a criticism of any political candidate or figure in office. So what happened was that Cyrus now sends the Jews back to Israel. And Ezra is trying to bring the Jews with him from Persia and from the diaspora to come back home. Let's rebuild the promised land. But guess what happened? When Ezra returned from Babylon to build the Second Temple, he sent word to the Jews on the Iberian Peninsula that they should return to the land of Israel with the rest of Jewry. However, the Jews living in Spain were not willing to return because they had a hunch that another exile was not far away. And they were correct, because right after they came back to rebuild the second temple, soon after, the Greeks rose to power, and the Greeks had the whole Hanukkah story, which we were successful with. We won the Hanukkah story. So the Greeks did not destroy our temple in exile as we drove them out of the land, thank God. But after the Greeks rose came the Romans, and the Romans did destroy our temple, our second temple, and they did drive us out of the land of Israel. And we're still exiled from the land of Israel. The reason we are today in America is because almost 2,000 years ago, in the year 69 CE, Titus, Vespasian, conquered the land of Israel, conquered the temple in Israel, in Jerusalem, and drove us out of our land and drove us into Rome, into exile. We're still struggling from that exile. We're still waiting to come back with the coming of Mashiach, right? So they sensed intuitively, the Spanish Jews, and this would be 2,200 years ago, they sensed that this exile was going to be, that this time in the promised land was going to be short-lived. And that's why they didn't want to uproot themselves from Spain. Nevertheless, these Jews wanted to make it clear that they were not abandoning their allegiance to Judaism and to the Jewish people. They wanted to show that we stand with you. So what did they do? We just don't want to schlep. To do this, they composed and sent this prayer, the prayer that is immediately following the Shema Yisrael, which starts emet, right after the Shema. They wrote this prayer, which is 15 successive endorsements and validations to say we agree, we approve, we support, we're with you. 15 words to say that all the above is true, right? And we agree with everything that you're doing. To do this, they composed and sent the V'yatziv prayer to Jerusalem, a prayer that underscored their strong faith in God and their hope to the ultimate redemption. That is the origin of this prayer. Isn't that interesting? It's from the Jews that didn't want to come back to the promised land. I'm just looking here at this Hebrew note. It says here that they were the men. There was another version that they weren't the men of Spain, but they were the residents of Tulitula. Maybe that is part of Spain, Tulitula. I don't know where that is exactly. Now, within this prayer, they were Kabbalists. The Sephardic Jews were always Kabbalists. Within this prayer is referenced the 3 exiles and the redemptions. I guess the previous exiles of Egypt, Persia, maybe Assyria. I'm not sure which exile they would have referred to. So there was many spiritual messages hinted in this prayer, and it has 8 times the word emes, truth, which is responding to the 8 redemptions. 4 of them happened in Egypt. Whatever. So there's a lot of Kabbalistic references inside of this prayer. So it's quite fascinating when we realize that this prayer that we've been reciting, it's on page 44 in the prayer book that we've been reciting for so long, right after the Shema, actually originated 2,200 years ago, right after the Purim story, when the Jewish people were returning back to the promised land, and there was a group of Jews in Spain that didn't want to return. Because of their Kabbalistic foresight, they were able to foretell that there was going to be a subsequent exile, and they wrote this prayer as a support and endorsement. That's like the American Jews that are sending support to Israel. That are saying, listen, we don't live in Israel, but we're sending you money, we support you. That's what this prayer is. It's support from the diaspora. This blessing includes mention of the wondrous miracles that God performed during the Exodus and the Sea of Reeds. This satisfies our obligation to praise God each morning for the miracle that he performs. The blessing concludes with the declaration of our faith that God is our Redeemer, and from that blessing of redemption, we go straight into the silent Amidah. So you're starting to see the anatomy of prayer. We start off in the morning with songs of praise, with blessings of acknowledgement, thanking God for all the things. Then we start off our prayer with thanking God, and we go into the songs of praise, which is not that God should know that God is loved, not that God should know that God is praised because of his insecurity complex, but that we should know that God is great, that we should be preparing our mindset, our meditation, to be able to confront God face to face, as mortal facing the immortal, as creature facing creation, as creation, facing his creator. We should know the greatness of God. Then we say the Baruch Hu, the blessing where we bow before God, and we go into the blessings leading up to the Shema, meditating upon the greatness of God, how God is so transcendent, even above the angels. We then go into the pinnacle of prayer, which is the Shema, pledging allegiance to one God, which then leads us into all the mitzvahs of the Shema, and now we've done the blessings after the Shema. So we were at the pinnacle of prayer, which is monotheism. But right there, when we're at the top of the mountain, declaring our faith in one God, we now go into the Amida prayer. The Amida means standing. It has two names. One is standing because you recite it standing. Another name of it is Shemona Esrei, which means 18, because it has 18 blessings. It has 18 requests of man's basic human needs. It actually has 19 when you count the blessings, because the sages later added in one extra one about the tale bearers, those who would report fellow Jews to the authorities. So the sages found it necessary to make a special blessing to report that the tale bearers, the slanderers, should be destroyed. Those that threaten to undermine the very fabric of our community, the very, when we have Jews telling on Jews reporting on Jews to the authorities and getting them killed. That's why the 18 blessings actually has a 19th blessing. But prayer, let's talk about the customs of the Amidah. Prayer is a multi-step ladder, and although we don't have the time today to explore all of its rungs, we have taken a deep dive into one of the steps, which is the blessings of the Shema and the Shema itself. During this step, we hope to develop an understanding of and a relationship with God as the creator of the world and as an entity that transcends it all. So that's what we're trying to do in the Shema. We're trying to develop an understanding of God and a relationship with God on two levels, as the creator of the world as well as transcendent of the world. Now, it's very important to understand what that means. When we're relating to God as transcendent, and that is what we're saying in the blessings leading up to the Shema, you're not just the creator of the world. God is far, 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 far greater than just being the creator of the world. It's almost like two chess pieces talking to each other, and they're talking about, is there a chess master, or is there just chaos and anarchy? Is there someone that is coordinating this game, or is there not? And they'll say, well, even if there is a coordinator, even if there is a chess master, then all that he does all day is just worry about this game of chess. And that would be ridiculous, because as human beings, we don't just worry about one game of chess. If you're a chess piece, I can understand why you think that your chess master only worries about chess. But that's just one of many, many, many things that he does. So too, when we are the human beings on the chessboard and we look up and we say, okay, let's say there is a God, but all that God is defined by is the fact that he creates us. That's ridiculous. God is transcendent. Which means that there is no way for us to truly fathom God. If we think that we're going to say, well, I'm not going to believe in God if he doesn't make sense to me. I'm not going to believe in God if I don't understand his actions or his choices, then you're exhibiting a fundamental misunderstanding of God. That would be like a chess piece saying, well, if I don't understand that move, therefore there is no chess master. But with all due respect, you're just a chess piece. And you're talking to a chess master that's much, much, much greater than you. So too, when we're as mortals, we're talking about God, we have to recognize and understand that God is far more transcendent from this world. It's not just defined by the creating of this world. And therefore, when we don't understand something like the Holocaust, and we're infuriated by something like the Holocaust, we say, okay, but God is far greater than our ability to understand. It's not like God is our equal, and therefore, if I don't understand him, then there's something really wrong with his judgment. Right? Rather, what it means is that there's so much more to God that you simply cannot fathom. And we spoke about this at length in the Talmud class 2 days ago. If you'd like, you can hear this Talmud class on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Again, that's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. It's called Why the Righteous Suffer and the Wicked Prosper. The essence of the answer, we went through various Talmudic commentaries as to why it is that the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. It was actually a question that Moses posed to God, and God answered. God answered by saying, you simply don't see what I see. That was the answer. You simply do not see what I see. You have a very limited perspective as a human being, and you don't see. Whether that was because of reincarnation, that you don't know who a person was in a previous lifetime, And that's why they're suffering, or that's why this is happening to them. Or whether you don't know what's going to happen later on down the line in the future, and maybe that's why they're prospering, or that's why they're suffering. We are simply limited to seeing only this present moment, so we can't see the future. We can't see the past. We don't see the bigger picture. We don't see anybody else, and that's why we simply cannot fathom God's judgment. So instead of saying that God has poor judgment, and I refuse to serve a God that is so weak, or that is such poor judgment, instead of saying I refuse to serve a God that exhibits such poor judgment, we realize when we say the Shema that God is transcendent. And if you think that if you're angry with God because you don't understand God, then you've exhibited a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of God. I mean, think about it. There's people that that are smarter than you, right? Every one of us has people in our lives that we know they're smarter than us. When they do something that we don't understand, do we say, oh, they're an idiot? Or do we say, gee, I guess there's something which I don't understand, right? Depends on your level of humility, really. Depends whether you're willing to acknowledge that person is truly smarter than yourself or not, or you're arrogant about it. Anyways, the next rung on the ladder, which is higher than the Shema, where prayer is a ladder. It's Jacob's ladder. It starts on the earth, and it's a ladder that starts on the earth, and its head is all the way up in the heavens. The next rung on the ladder is the highest rung. That's the Amida, or the Shemona Esrei. When we get to know God as something vastly greater than ourselves and our world, at that point, we actually stop thinking about ourselves. It's no longer about me. Our desires and needs suddenly lose their importance and seem irrelevant. Once we become absorbed by God's infinite greatness, we develop a sense of Beetle, a self-nullification, a surrendering of self-awareness, and a total focus on God. This is the feeling to which we aspire during the Shemona Esrei. We stand humbly before God. We're turning our ego off. We are so awed by being in the presence of such a great God that we stop to feel ourselves. It's no longer about me. We're no longer ego-centered. We're now God-centered. We're now identifying with our godly soul. We often experience a sense of awe. When you go to the Grand Canyon, for example, or you see something which is truly awesome, you go silent. You're like, oh. You don't speak for a little bit. You go silent. You experience wonder, as you're awed by something amazing that's going on around you. And maybe you can experience that in love, when you look deeply into the eyes of someone that you love and you stop feeling yourself because you're awed by the awesomeness of the experience of love. To be sure, even if we don't feel this in our conscious minds, we realize that this is occurring within our souls. Our task is to also consciously experience at least some of this self-surrender. And that's why we stand in this form. We stand before God with our feet together. We bow. We're surrendering our ego and incorporating ourselves within God. So this is why we do the following. We stand upright with our feet together, right? This part of the davening is where we're actually facing Jerusalem, by the way. It's very important. You want to make sure that you're facing Jerusalem. So take out your phone app and do a compass. Take out the compass and find out where east is. So you'll know wherever east is that's the direction you should be facing when you're davening at home, right? Whenever you daven at home, you should face Jerusalem. The tradition of facing Jerusalem dates back to King Solomon, who taught that all the prayers in the world make their way to Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and from there they ascend to God, right? So by praying towards Jerusalem, we're exhibiting that self-nullification, that surrendering of our ego before God by facing Jerusalem. It's interesting, by the way, that the Arabs who claim that Jerusalem is their homeland, they pray with their backs to Jerusalem. The Jews who they claim stole the land of Israel from them have been praying facing Jerusalem since King Solomon, who built our first temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem almost 3,000 years ago. A point to ponder. We imagine ourselves as standing before the king. That's what we're doing. We're standing before the king. Before beginning, it's customary to take 3 steps backwards to demonstrate that we're approaching God in direct, personal prayer. You're stepping out of your comfort zone. You're going backward. When standing in front of a table or wall, we take 3 steps back, and then we take the required 3 steps forward. It's like you're stepping out of your world, out of your bubble, out of your ego, and now you're approaching God with awe, with humility. Now we pray silently. You're not supposed to raise your voice when you're davening the Shemona Esrei. In fact, it's considered heretical, by the way, for someone who raises his voice while they're praying the silent Amidah. It's called the silent Amidah because it's supposed to be recited silently, right? As opposed to the repetition of the Amidah, which is supposed to be recited aloud by the Chazan. So only the repetition is recited aloud. The first time you're supposed to read it silently to yourself. You're not supposed to read it to say the Shema. Sorry, the Amidah aloud. But you are supposed to say it loud enough to hear, for your own ear to hear, like this. So here I'm whispering, I can hear myself, but the guy next to me can't really hear what I'm saying. If you're raising your voice, in fact, you're confusing, you're annoying the person next to you. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay, our sense of self-surrender leads us to pray in a manner in which our voice is audible only to ourselves. That's a state of Beetle, a state of surrender. Interesting, friends, I just want to tell you, by the way, that I'm writing an article. I wrote an article all night last night about racism. And it ties in with ego. I wonder what you'll think about it. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts about it. But it's an article about the spiritual roots of racism. I see Rabbi just gave me a thumbs up. Part of our ongoing conversation, right? The racism is born out of ego. And when we're able to experience what we just spoke about in the Shemona Esrei, to surrender our ego. Let me just explain. Our ego is constantly searching to define itself in this very tumultuous world around us. So the way that ego defines itself is by creating contrast, by saying them and me, by creating groups, by creating other versus us, them and us, right? And much of human nature is like that. The soccer teams, the football teams, there's the Chicago Cubs. Did I say that right? The Red Sox, the White Sox, Chicago Cubs, I think, right? And the the LA Lakers, right? We're into rivalry. Why are we so into rivalry? Because rivalry gives us a sense of definition. If you are you, then I am I. Our ego thrives on separation, on difference, on bias, on judgment, on prejudice. But if we're able to overcome our ego, as we're doing in the Shemona Esrei and the Amidah, it's then that we can divest of racism. That's what I'm writing about today. I wonder what you'll think about it. So we introduced the Shemona Esrei with one phrase. Thank you, Rob. I hope you'll like them. Thank you. There's my mother-in-law also, my shviger. She says racism born out of ego. I'd love to read that article. I gotta tell you, my mind was racing. I was up till very, very late last night. I think I wrote till 3 a.m. I was just up, and I was really, very inspired by this article, and it should be coming out shortly as soon as my editor approves it for publication. So it should be coming out pretty soon this morning. Okay, so thank you. I hope that I would love to hear your feedback. By the way, that would be very, very interesting to hear. All of these customs, the one thing I said was we introduced the Shemona Esrei with one line. It's Hashem Sfatai Tiftach Ufi Yagiti Latecha. We say, God, open my lips and my mouth will speak your praises. Because right now at this point we've reached the pinnacle of prayer, the top of the ladder. We started like Jacob at the bottom with the ladder rooted on the ground in Jacob's dream. And we're now all the way at the top. We've gone through the rung, starting at acknowledgement and thanking and recognizing God's greatness through verbal affirmations. We've approached the divine through praising God's greatness and his wonders and his transcendence. And now we're standing all the way at the top of the ladder. We're face to face with God. We're in a state of surrender and humility. And we're saying, God, I can't even speak before you because I'm in the presence of the king. Imagine you walk into the presence of the king. You don't just say, hey, king, what's up? You don't do that. When you're standing in the presence of somebody really, really important, you keep your mouth quiet until they open the conversation. My mother-in-law is here, and I've had an ongoing discussion with her about this over the years, about her father. Our grandfather, my grandfather-in-law, is a revered chassid by the name of Gershon Mendel Gorelik, zu lange gesunde Jahren, for many long and healthy years. Rabbi Gorelik is the Chabad Shaliach, the chief Chabad Shaliach rabbi to Italy. He went there over 60 years ago. Unbelievable. And whenever he came to the Rebbe, he refused to talk. He wouldn't speak in front of the Rebbe. He would not speak in front of the Rebbe. He would not open his mouth. And I always, discuss this with my mother-in-law as I say, I don't understand. When the Rebbe would ask a question, he wouldn't answer. He would just sit there because he was so humble. He was so incredibly nothing before the greatness of the Rebbe that he couldn't talk. And for me, I'm a next generation kid. For me, I feel like, wouldn't the Rebbe want to converse with you? Wouldn't the Rebbe want to hear what you have to say? And of course, I respect my mother-in-law dearly, and I know that I couldn't even fit in the shoes of my mother-in-law and my grandfather-in-law for sure. And I respect what I don't understand, but to me, I would think, and that's only because I never actually saw the Rebbe, I would think that I could talk to the Rebbe. I would think, but I obviously respect and admire the position of my grandfather-in-law, who was able to, who couldn't utter a sound in the presence of the Rebbe. That's true greatness. It's standing before true greatness. That's why he couldn't talk. I wonder if my mother-in-law would speak in front of the Rebbe. I don't know. I think she did. I don't know. Maybe if you're there, Storch figure, if you could let us know, we'd love to hear. But that's what we do. When we stand before Hashem, we say, God, can't talk anymore. I need you to open my lips to allow me to praise you. In other words, I need you to let me know that it's okay for me to speak because I'm totally surrendered before you. Our souls are in such a state of submission that we are unable to utter a word. The only way for our souls to speak is to ask God to give it the strength to do so. We take several bows during the Amidah. These will be outlined coming up. All these customs are meant to help imbue in us a sense of surrender, which is the theme of Shemona Esrei. Now, I want to say that when I speak about surrender, we spoke about this theme extensively in our Tanya class. We do Tanya on Tuesdays. That's Chabad philosophy. On Tuesdays, you can find that class. We spoke about this at length in a beautiful discussion on this past Tuesday. You'll find it again at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's the Tanya class at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, where we spoke about the idea that you have to divest of ego in order to allow the light to shine within you. And that also inspired my article about racism, because to see the light in someone else, you have to divest of your own ego as well. You cannot possibly see your light when there is ego, and you cannot possibly see their light when there is ego. Ego is a state of dysfunction. Ego is a distraction from reality. When we divest of ego, that's when the light of us and the light of others is able to shine. So when I spoke about it then, I used, it's very difficult to translate the word Beetle. It's something which in the American consciousness is something which we can't even relate to. Like, we live in a generation of self-promotion. I need you to know what I'm eating for breakfast right now. I need to post a picture of my breakfast, a picture of my car, a picture of my vacation. I have the best life on Facebook, brag book, right? To let the whole world know how amazing my life is and how happy my family is that 2 seconds later, I can go back to the depressed self that I really am, right? We have to constantly make our lives look better than they really are, right, in our American culture. And for Torah to come in and tell us this concept of surrendering the ego, we don't even have a word for this. So when I use words like surrendering the ego or breaking the ego or humbling yourself, it's something which we actually want to despise. We're like, I don't want that. Who wants that? So I have to tell you that I'm still searching for the right word over here to make this idea even palatable. I'm still struggling. I've been thinking about this for a week at least to try to find the right way to express this idea of divesting of the ego. What we're doing is we're standing before God. How do you feel about standing before God in utter submission, utter surrender? Is surrender a strength or is surrender a weakness? And I want you to think about it in this context. When two people are married and they get into a disagreement, maybe a harsh disagreement, and one of them will apologize to the other. Is that apology to the spouse, is that strength or is that weakness? Think about it a moment. The one who apologizes to the other, are they more weak and that's why they surrender, they apologize? Or are they more strong, which is why they apologize? I believe that they're stronger. Because they're stronger, that's why they're able to divest of their own ego and to allow the other, to raise the other upon a pedestal. So I see surrender of the ego as a positive quality. And I wonder how you feel about that. So Ed says maybe lack of ego. Yeah, you know what? Maybe that's a good way to go. Maybe to lack of dysfunction. Maybe that's the way to go. To say that when you stand before God, that's actually a way to go. I like that, Ed. A lack of dysfunction. That when we stand before God in humility, what we're doing is that we're divesting of our ego, we're divesting of our dysfunction, we're divesting of our insatiable appetite for the pursuit of happiness that we will never reach by definition, because our ego always wants more and is never, ever, ever satisfied. So our ego always needs to push others away and to define ourselves by pushing others down. Yeah, I think that's the idea here. We're standing before God, not just by making ourselves into a doormat. That's not the idea. The idea is to divest of the dysfunction and to set our souls free into a state of functionality, where we're not limited and controlled by our addictions, by our problems, by our dysfunction, but we're able to connect with our source, with our origin, to our organic connection with our mothership with God. And that's what we're doing when we're standing in the Shema, in the Amidah. What we're going to do next week is to actually go through line by line, blessing by blessing on the Amidah. And that's going to lead us through to the end of this class, which is going to be just a discussion on each and every one of the blessings of the Shema. We're going to talk about a summary of the blessing. We're going to talk about its order, its sequence in the blessings of the Amidah, and we're going to talk about the customs of each particular blessing. So lots of good stuff coming up. I want to thank you all for joining me here this morning. I want to remind you that today at 11:30, Corey is giving a class on Tehillim and Hebrew reading, King David Psalms. It's at Zoom, jewishgardens.com/Zoom. Tonight at 7:30. I think it's at 7:30. Look out for the email. We're going to have a pre-Shabbat candle lighting Farbrengen, 7:30 tonight. And look out for the article on racism. I'm curious to know how you feel about it. Adam Tress from Atlanta, Yashikach, and good Shabbos to all. Elaine, where will your article appear? It's in the weekly email. I'm about to send it out. And doesn't one need a strong sense of self to have the courage to surrender, in contrast to a destructive ego? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's a very delicate, subtle concept that, but in order to divest of ego, you need to be strong. Not strong in ego, but you need to be rooted in your godly soul, basically. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I want to end it up over here, but basically, you've got to be able to let go. To be able to set yourself free, you've got to be anchored and rooted in your identity as a godly soul. So I'm going to leave it at that. And any other comments coming in here? That's pretty much it. No, the Armor, my mother-in-law. Oh, she's answering my question. I have had occasion to ask a blessing from the Rebbe, but I practiced in advance the exact words I would use. And I try to make it as concise as possible, as not to take up the Rebbe's precious time. So it's fascinating that I thank you for Shviger for that. You're explaining about how you are able to speak in the presence of true greatness, of something which is truly transcendent from anything that we could ever possibly reach. And that's talking to the Rebbe, who is not just another rabbi. The Rebbe is like an angel of God. It's like a prophet. This is something unbelievable, right? What a Rebbe is, as we learned early in the Hayom Yom. And I see that different to your father, who literally doesn't speak before the Rebbe. You are able to speak, but very careful words. You're obviously not having free conversation. You're carefully rehearsed words, very short, and very much imbued with that same awe that your father has before the Rebbe. That's quite fascinating. Thank you, Graciela. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Rob Berger, humble, modest, unassuming is the absence of ego. Okay, 1 second. Humble, modest. Now, modest, I have to say, Rob, the word modest in America today sounds like nerd. Modest equals nerd. That's what I think. I don't think that's anything that anybody wants to aspire to. Modest is a word we have to be very careful with. Its connotations are negative. Humble, I think, is associated with the word feeble, which means shmata. I don't think that people aspire to be humble. And unassuming also is somebody that's just a doormat who doesn't, absence of ego, I think is what Ed was saying. I think is good, because that's a positive spin. It's the absence of dysfunction. I think we all recognize that our futile pursuit of happiness. I think we can all recognize that as long as we've lived, we've always searched for happiness, and we never really found it. Even when we bought the third home, and when we went on that cruise, and when we took that vacation, and when we bought the other car, we still didn't find happiness. We recognize that our insatiable ego is dysfunctional. So it's divesting of the dysfunction as a manifestation of our Beetle. Maybe the word we should use in Hebrew is a Hebrew word, Beetle, so we don't mess it up. Is our surrendering before God, is our, I don't know, the word surrendering also is very negative. I got to find the right way to say this. I'm struggling with it. If you can think of it, please let me know. But with that, guys, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. See you tonight at 7:30 for the Farbrengen. And let me know about what you think about my article on racism. What did I call it? Racism Resolved. An ambitious project. Let me see what you think. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Hope to see you tomorrow. Remember, there's a Kiddush in Shul tomorrow. We are doing a takeaway Kiddush. It's a takeaway Kiddush, which means there's no danger here. It's approved by the doctors. It means that you can literally hear the Kiddush, take your cup of wine, pre-poured by somebody who's masked and gloved, and you have your little box to go. There's no lines, there's no touching, there's no everything, no people getting too close to each other. We would love to have you. There's a bar mitzvah tomorrow, and the boy that Jonathan has been practicing for a whole year, he's going to read the Torah beautifully. We want to make sure that there's a proper minyan and a nice crowd, obviously within our limitations, to be able to honor the family, to make this bar mitzvah special, that they shouldn't feel that they had half a bar mitzvah, God forbid, but that it should be special. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody. Over and out. Shabbat Shalom. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.